They called it the Jug, and to the Germans, it was a nightmare with wings. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't sleek like the Messerschmitt or elegant like the Spitfire. It was big, heavy, and looked more like a flying barrel than a fighter plane. Yet when German pilots faced it in the skies, they discovered something terrifying: the Thunderbolt simply refused to die. Bullets tore through its fuselage, cannons shredded its wings, flak burst around it in fiery clouds, and still, time and again, it clawed its way back home. To Luftwaffe aces who prided themselves on precision kills, this machine was a cruel joke. How could something so clumsy outlast the best of German engineering? The answer was even more shocking than they imagined, because the P-47 wasn't just an aircraft. It was America's indestructible hammer in the sky. By 1943, the air war over Europe had become a brutal contest of survival. The Luftwaffe still held a fearsome reputation, its pilots hardened by years of combat, flying machines like the FW-190 and the Me-109 that had terrorized the skies since the beginning of the war. To German eyes, American planes were nothing more than mass-produced machines, built in factories, not forged in tradition. They expected easy prey. And then came the P-47 Thunderbolt. It did not glide into battle with beauty or finesse. It roared in, heavy and unshaken, spitting fire with 8.50 caliber machine guns and taking punishment no other fighter could endure. German pilots scoffed at its size until they emptied their guns into it and watched in disbelief as it kept flying. The P-47 was not just an aircraft, it was a message. A message that America's industrial power, its engineering, and its spirit had created something the Luftwaffe could neither match nor destroy. This is the story of how one unlikely plane shattered German confidence, survived the impossible, and earned a place as one of the most feared weapons of the Second World War. When German pilots first spotted the P-47 in combat, many dismissed it as a mistake of American design. To them, a fighter should be nimble, sleek, and deadly. The P-47 was none of those things at first glance. It was bulky, weighing nearly twice as much as a Messerschmitt Bf-109. Its profile in the sky looked like a lumbering giant compared to the razor-sharp lines of German aircraft. But appearances would prove deceiving. The first encounters shocked the Luftwaffe. Expecting to see the Jug fall apart under pressure, they instead saw it dive with breathtaking speed. Thanks to its massive engine and rugged frame, the Thunderbolt could plummet from the skies in controlled dives that German fighters could not match without tearing their wings apart. Time after time, P-47 pilots used this advantage to escape traps or to strike suddenly from above with devastating force. German pilots soon learned that the Thunderbolt's real terror lay in its ability to survive punishment. Reports circulated of P-47s returning to base with wings shredded, fuselage ripped, engine smoking yet somehow still flying. Where a German plane would disintegrate, the Thunderbolt endured. Its armor protected the pilot, its radial engine kept turning even when peppered with bullets, and its sheer size gave it resilience unmatched in the skies of Europe. The P-47's 8 machine guns only added to the nightmare. In a single pass, it could unleash a storm of lead powerful enough to rip through trains, convoys, and even tanks. To German ground forces, the sound of its guns became a warning that survival was unlikely. To Luftwaffe aces, it was a reminder that they were fighting an enemy whose machines could take damage and still deliver death. This combination, durability, firepower, and speed in a dive, transformed the P-47 into something German pilots both feared and respected. What began as laughter at its clumsy frame soon became silence in the ready rooms of Luftwaffe squadrons. Because the truth was undeniable, no matter how hard they tried, the Jug simply would not die. Stories of the Thunderbolt's survival spread quickly across Europe. German pilots who had once mocked the machine began sharing tales that bordered on the unbelievable. A P-47 riddled with cannon shells would stagger through the clouds, its wings torn and its tail nearly gone, and still it would limp back to England. Another was seen flying with half its fuselage shredded by flak, yet the pilot managed to guide it safely onto a runway. To the Luftwaffe, these were not just rumors, they were humiliating truths witnessed in the skies. The difference lay in design. The P-47's air-cooled radial engine was not only powerful but almost impossible to kill. German fighters relied on liquid-cooled engines, which, once punctured, bled coolant and seized within minutes. But the Thunderbolt's radial engine could take bullets and still run hot, coughing smoke but refusing to die. To German aces used to finishing kills with a well-aimed burst, this was infuriating. What should have been victories turned into wasted ammunition and bitter frustration. Even more frightening was the Jug's range. With drop tanks attached, it could escort American bombers deep into German territory. Luftwaffe pilots, already strained from defending against relentless Allied bombing raids, now found themselves hunted by an enemy that refused to break. And every time they thought they had crippled a Thunderbolt, they watched it climb again, spitting fire from its 8.50 caliber guns. For German pilots, pride was as important as skill. They had grown up believing in the superiority of their machines and their training. But the Thunderbolt shattered that illusion. Pilots who once bragged about their kills returned from missions shaken, admitting that the American fighter was unlike anything they had faced before. It was not elegant, it was not beautiful, but it was unstoppable. And in war, survival mattered more than style. The Luftwaffe soon realized that the P-47 was more than just a nuisance. It was a symbol of American resilience. Every time a Jug returned home, scarred but alive, it sent a message: Germany could not break America's machines, and it could not break America's will. By the middle of 1944, the Luftwaffe's morale was beginning to fracture, and the P-47 Thunderbolt played no small role in that collapse. For years, German pilots had been raised on the myth of their invincibility. The Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs had dominated the skies early in the war, and the Luftwaffe had been the pride of Hitler's Reich. But the arrival of the Thunderbolt began to erode that confidence piece by piece. At first, German aces still fought with arrogance. They dove on P-47s expecting quick kills. But mission after mission ended with those same, lumbering giants either escaping or returning fire with devastating effect. The Luftwaffe had always relied on its reputation. Fear was a weapon just as sharp as steel. Now, that weapon was being turned back against them. The sight of a P-47 shrugging off cannon hits became a symbol of futility. Soon, whispers began circulating in German ready rooms. Young pilots, barely out of training, asked their commanders why their planes could not endure the same punishment. Veterans, once proud of their victories, grew hesitant when they saw Thunderbolts in formation. The belief that German engineering was unmatched, a cornerstone of Nazi propaganda, was cracking under the weight of every Jug that clawed its way home riddled with holes. The psychological effect was devastating. War is fought not only with guns and bombs but also with conviction. The Luftwaffe's conviction was built on superiority, but the Thunderbolt's resilience stripped that away. If an enemy plane could survive everything they threw at it, what did that say about their own strength? For many German pilots, it meant admitting something unthinkable. That America, the nation they had underestimated, had built an aircraft more powerful than their own. This realization was more dangerous than any bullet. Fear does not stay in the skies, it travels into the hearts of men. And by 1944, the Luftwaffe's heart was beginning to fail. While German pilots wrestled with disbelief, American pilots were discovering something equally powerful: confidence. At first, many U.S. flyers had doubts about the Thunderbolt. It was heavy, hard to maneuver, and seemed clumsy compared to the agile German fighters they were up against. But once they took the Jug into battle, they realized it had a gift no pilot could ignore: the gift of survival. American flyers quickly learned that the P-47 could absorb punishment and still bring them home. Pilots returned from missions with holes in their wings large enough to crawl through, with oil leaking across the canopy, and with engines coughing smoke like dying beasts. Yet time and again, the Thunderbolt refused to let them down. For a pilot, nothing mattered more than knowing his machine would not abandon him in the sky. And the Jug gave that assurance like no other plane in the war. This trust transformed how American pilots fought. They flew lower, struck harder, and dove deeper into enemy fire because they knew they had a chance of making it back alive. When chasing enemy fighters, they could dive at speeds the Luftwaffe dared not match. When hammering German convoys, they unleashed torrents of machine gun fire and rockets without fearing a single burst of flak would send them crashing down. The P-47 gave them a boldness that German pilots could not match. More than that, it built camaraderie. Pilots spoke of their Jugs as if they were loyal friends, machines that carried them through hell and back. Some even gave their battered planes names, painting them proudly on the nose as if to honor a fellow soldier. To these men, the Thunderbolt was more than metal and bolts, it was a shield. A partner, a guardian angel made of steel. And as confidence grew among American pilots, fear grew among the Luftwaffe. Every mission became a duel not just of firepower, but of willpower. And in that contest, the Thunderbolt was tipping the balance of the air war. The true measure of the P-47 Thunderbolt was revealed in the great battles of 1944. Over Normandy, as Allied troops stormed the beaches on D-Day, the Thunderbolt roared overhead like a guardian of the invasion. German soldiers, trained to expect air superiority from their own Luftwaffe, instead found themselves pinned down by swarms of American Jugs tearing through the skies. The P-47's 8 machine guns cut across defenses, shredding vehicles, gun emplacements, and troops with relentless firepower. What made the Jug especially devastating was its ability to act as both fighter and ground attacker. Armed with rockets and bombs, the Thunderbolt transformed into a flying artillery piece. It blasted German tanks, supply lines, and trains with a ferocity that ground forces had never seen before. Veterans of the Wehrmacht later admitted that they feared the low hum of an approaching Thunderbolt more than the shells of Allied artillery. To them, the sound meant destruction from above was inevitable. In the Battle of the Bulge, when German forces launched their desperate counteroffensive through the Ardennes, the Thunderbolt once again proved its worth. Despite brutal weather that grounded many planes, the Jug still found ways to break through the clouds and hammer German armor. Columns of tanks, which had once been symbols of German power, were turned into smoking wrecks under the Jug's relentless assaults. The Luftwaffe tried to fight back, but its numbers were dwindling, and its spirit was broken. Against the combined might of Allied air power, the P-47 was the anvil on which German resistance shattered. Its presence meant that no German soldier, no tank, and no convoy was truly safe day or night. Rain or shine. By the end of 1944, the message was clear: the Thunderbolt was not only a fighter plane, but also a terror weapon that crushed German hopes on land as well as in the air. By late 1944, even the most seasoned German aces could no longer deny the truth: the Thunderbolt was a monster they could not tame. Pilots who had once mocked its bulky frame were now warning their comrades to be cautious whenever a Jug appeared in the skies. What had started as arrogance had turned into grudging respect, and beneath that respect lay a deep current of fear. German combat reports tell the story. Pilots wrote of unleashing everything they had: cannons, machine guns, even ramming attempts, only to watch in disbelief as the P-47 kept flying. They admitted that what should have been easy victories often turned into wasted ammunition and dangerous duels. For many Luftwaffe veterans, the Jug became a symbol of American industrial strength, a reminder that Germany could not outlast an enemy with seemingly endless resources and machines that refused to die. In squadron briefings, Luftwaffe commanders began cautioning new recruits about the P-47's durability. Do not underestimate it, they warned, and never assume it will go down quickly. For young German pilots, this was a sobering lesson. They entered the war expecting to dominate the skies, only to face an enemy aircraft that shattered their confidence before they even climbed into their cockpits. The psychological toll was immense. Pilots confessed that seeing a formation of Thunderbolts filled them with dread, not only because of their firepower, but because of their refusal to break. Every Jug that returned home, riddled with holes, told a story that echoed across both sides of the front. To the Americans, it was proof of resilience. To the Germans, it was proof of futility. By the end of the war, even hardened Luftwaffe aces admitted that the Thunderbolt had earned its place among the most respected fighters of the conflict. It may not have been the fastest or the most elegant, but it was the one they feared, and fear, in the end, was a weapon more powerful than any gun. As the war dragged into its final months, the Thunderbolt became more than just a weapon, it became a symbol of inevitability. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was now a shadow of its former self. Fuel shortages, lack of experienced pilots, and overwhelming Allied numbers had crippled its effectiveness. And at the heart of that Allied air power, roaring through the skies in relentless waves, was the P-47 Jug. The Thunderbolt did not just protect bombers anymore, it dominated the battlefield below. Day after day, German convoys were ambushed, bridges destroyed, and tanks obliterated. Entire divisions found themselves cut off because their supply lines had been torn apart by Jug attacks. German commanders, already desperate, watched helplessly as their forces were harassed from dawn until dusk by the flying tanks of the U.S. Army Air Forces. By early 1945, Luftwaffe pilots could barely challenge them. With every mission, their numbers dwindled further. For the young recruits sent into combat, survival against a Thunderbolt was a miracle in itself. Many barely had the fuel to reach the front lines before they were swarmed by Jugs diving out of the sun. Against such overwhelming power, skill and bravery meant little. For American pilots, these final months proved what they already knew: the P-47 was indestructible. Veterans spoke of it with pride, calling it the plane that never let them down. For every story of a Jug limping home on one engine, trailing smoke and riddled with holes, there was another of it turning back to finish the fight. To the men who flew it, the Thunderbolt was not just an aircraft, but a legend in the making. When Germany finally collapsed, the Luftwaffe lay in ruins. And while many Allied planes contributed to that destruction, the P-47 stood apart. It had broken not just the machines of the Reich, but also the spirit of the men who once ruled the skies. In the end, the Jug's legacy was written in the silence of German pilots who could no longer deny the truth: America had built a warplane that survived everything. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in May 1945, the battlefield was littered with wrecks of German tanks, trains, and aircraft, many of them destroyed by the relentless fury of the P-47 Thunderbolt. For the Allies, the Jug was more than a machine of war, it was a symbol of survival and dominance. For the Germans, it was the constant reminder that no matter how hard they fought, there was always an enemy plane overhead that simply refused to die. The statistics alone told a staggering story. Thunderbolts flew hundreds of thousands of sorties, dropped thousands of tons of bombs, and fired millions of rounds. But behind those numbers were countless human stories of pilots who returned home alive because their aircraft absorbed what should have been fatal blows, of bomber crews saved by Jug escorts, of infantry on the ground who cheered when they heard the heavy roar of its engine above. German prisoners of war later admitted their shock. Many confessed they had never faced an aircraft that combined so much resilience with such devastating power. Even Luftwaffe veterans who had fought since 1939 reluctantly acknowledged that the Jug had changed the balance of the air war. The flying tank, as they called it, had not only beaten them in combat, it had stripped away the aura of superiority they had carried for so long. For American pilots, the P-47 was a companion they would never forget. Decades after the war, veterans still spoke of their Jugs with gratitude, remembering the times they returned home with wings shredded, engines smoking, and holes that seemed impossible to patch, yet somehow, their Thunderbolt had carried them back safely. To them, the plane was not just steel and rivets. It was a guardian, a savior, and a legend. As history moved on, the P-47 was eventually replaced by newer designs, faster jets, and sleeker machines. But its reputation endured. The Germans who once mocked it had ended up fearing it. The Americans who once doubted it had come to love it. And in the skies of World War II, few planes could claim a legacy so powerful, a legend built not on beauty, but but on sheer, unstoppable survival. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is not just the story of a plane, it is the story of resilience, determination, and the collapse of a myth. For years, the Luftwaffe had been seen as untouchable, its pilots and machines celebrated as the masters of the sky. But the Jug shattered that illusion. With every mission, it proved that brute strength, reliability, and relentless firepower could overcome elegance and speed. To the Germans, it was a constant frustration, a target that refused to fall, a nightmare that hunted them from above. To the Americans, it was a lifeline, the aircraft that carried them through fire and fury, that gave them the courage to dive into danger knowing they might still come home. It was more than a war machine, it was a bond between man and metal, a partnership forged in the most desperate battles of the 20th century. When German pilots looked at the Jug, they did not just see an enemy plane, they saw the collapse of their own dominance. And when American pilots looked at it, they saw survival itself. That duality is what made the Thunderbolt legendary, feared by its enemies, beloved by its allies, and respected by all who flew against it. In the end, the P-47 stood as a reminder that no weapon is truly invincible except the will to endure. Against all odds, it survived everything thrown its way, and in doing so, it became one of the most iconic symbols of World War II. So I'll leave you with this question: in a war filled with legends, do you think the Jug's greatest victory was in the skies or in the hearts of the men who feared and trusted it?